We tell ourselves that children can't possibly commit the kinds of horrific acts we associate with adult criminals. Some of America's most shocking crimes have been planned and committed by minors. Stay with us as we count down some of the most feared killer kids locked away in U.S. prisons. Alyssa Bustamante. We will begin this true crime exploration with the notorious Alyssa Bustamante, the thrill killer in a modest Missouri neighborhood. People talk about Alyssa Bustamante in hushed voices. She was 15, a girl who liked hanging out with friends, posting on social media, and wearing the usual teenage fashion. If you looked at her MySpace and YouTube profiles, you'd see some dark references, an obsession with cutting, mentions of killing people as a twisted, almost sarcastic hobby, but you might chalk it up to teenage angst. Then came October 21st, 2009, and any illusions of typical teenage rebellion were shattered forever. 9-year-old Elizabeth Olton lived down the street from Alyssa. She was sweet, trusting, and simply out playing in her yard that night, doing nothing more unusual than letting her imagination run free. Somehow Alyssa convinced Elizabeth to follow her into the nearby woods. In that hidden pocket of darkness, Alyssa strangled her, slitting the child's throat before stabbing her repeatedly with a kitchen knife. She had even dug a shallow grave behind the houses where she buried Elizabeth's lifeless body. The motive? It appeared to be curiosity. Alyssa later wrote in her journal how she wanted to know what it felt like to kill someone. She called the sensation amazing once she got past the initial terror of following through. It's a line from her diary that will forever ring in the memories of those who followed the case. "I just killed someone. It was pretty enjoyable." A frantic search began when Elizabeth's mother, Patty, noticed her daughter missing. Police combed the area, searching every corner of the woods and farmland. Neighbors put up missing person posters. Anxiety gripped the community like a vice. The eventual discovery of Elizabeth's body was horrifying enough. But what truly froze investigators' blood was the sheer callousness revealed in Alyssa's writings. Confronted by interrogators who had found her incriminating journal, Alyssa first claimed it was an accident, insisting she never intended to murder Elizabeth. But faced with the blunt evidence of her own words, she confessed. During the trial in 2012, despite being a minor, she was tried as an adult and took a plea deal for second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to a long, multi-decade incarceration. If she's ever released, she'll likely be in her 60s. Those who supported Alyssa claim she had a troubled home life with mental health struggles that were ignored. Her defenders said society failed her. Others saw it differently. A cold, calculated thrill killer who satisfied a gruesome curiosity. Even seasoned detectives described it as one of the most chilling cases they'd ever encountered. A child killer with the same savage edge you'd expect from the worst adult psychopaths. The story leaves a deeply unsettling question. How do we reconcile mental health, environment, and personal responsibility in someone so young, yet so violent? Heavenly Arroyo. The city of Fall River, Massachusetts, has its ghosts. Once known as the home of Lizzie Borden, it's no stranger to violent stories. But in October 2019, a new horror emerged. 15-year-old Heavenly Arroyo had recently moved into a relative's home on Johnson Street, living with Ana Vasquez Rodriguez, age 68, and Ana's grandson. The family dynamic was already fraught with tensions over custody, finances, and day-to-day living. Yet no one suspected that teenage frustration could escalate to murder. On October 6, 2019, Heavenly's great-uncle was supposed to go to New York to finalize legal documents for her custody. Car troubles delayed the trip, fueling her anger. At some point, her impatience boiled over. She grabbed a pair of scissors from the kitchen and walked into Ana's bedroom. Vasquez Rodriguez was bedridden, making her especially vulnerable. Without warning or pity, Heavenly stabbed her around 70 times. In the next room, Ana's grandson played video games, wearing a headset, unaware. After the attack, Heavenly calmly showered, disposed of her blood-soaked clothes in a dumpster, and returned to tell him that his grandmother was feeling sick. Only when he checked on her did he realize the monstrous truth and immediately dialed 911. Investigators quickly pulled surveillance footage from the Fall River Housing Authority, which showed Heavenly throwing away her clothes. This contradicted her initial story about seeing a masked man run off. Arrested and charged with murder, she appeared in court unflinching. At one hearing, she smiled, flipped her hair, and answered to her name with unsettling nonchalance. Those present were stunned. In 2023, she pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The judge sentenced her to life with the possibility of parole after 19 years. For many, it's almost impossible to fathom how a teenage girl could unleash such ferocity on a defenseless elderly woman, someone she was supposed to be living with under care and protection. Yet the savage nature of the crime underscores a pattern that disturbs us all. Rage and violence are not restricted to adults. They can erupt in the hearts of the very young. Lionel Tate. Our third tale begins on July 28, 1999, in Broward County, Florida. It's the story of Lionel Tate, who was just 12 when he became responsible for the death of 6-year-old Tiffany Unick. The big question that shook the courts, the media, and the nation was this: was it an innocent wrestling match gone terribly wrong, or was it an act of intentional violence? On that fateful day, Lionel's mother, Kathleen Grossett Tate, a Florida State Highway Patrol trooper, was taking a nap upstairs, leaving Tiffany in Lionel's care. She'd known Tiffany's family, presumably trusting Lionel to watch the younger girl for a short time. Next thing anyone knew, Lionel was hollering for his mother, saying Tiffany wasn't breathing. By the time paramedics arrived, the child was gone. The autopsy revealed injuries akin to those in severe car accidents: a fractured skull, broken rib, and internal hemorrhage. Tate's defense argued he had only been reenacting moves he'd seen professional wrestlers perform on television. He was a 170-pound preteen. Tiffany weighed barely 45 pounds. Any adult could see how such an imbalance in size might quickly become lethal. But was it truly accidental? Prosecutors weren't convinced. Under Florida's felony murder rule, if you knowingly commit an act that is likely to seriously harm a child, and that act leads to the child's death, you can be charged with first-degree murder. The jury convicted Lionel in 2001, making him the youngest American ever to receive a life sentence without parole. But many were stunned. Could a 12-year-old truly understand the consequences of what he was doing? Others felt the severity of Tiffany's injuries suggested more than a mere accident. An appeals court overturned the life sentence in 2004, concluding that Lionel's mental competency needed a more thorough assessment. He was briefly freed, but the taste of freedom didn't last. Lionel's later arrest for armed robbery and other probation violations sent him back to prison. Today, he resides behind bars in the Charlotte Correctional Institution. What truly happened that night? Did Lionel Tate intentionally brutalize Tiffany, or did he disastrously misjudge the damage he could cause? The lines of blame, mercy, and youth swirl in an uncomfortable gray area, stirring debates about how the justice system should treat underage defendants. T.J. Lane, the Defiant killer. In the small town of Chardon, Ohio, a place that, until February 27, 2012, was known mostly for its quiet streets and neighborly vibe, that morning, students gathered in the high school cafeteria before classes began, chatting, texting, maybe rushing to finish homework. No one could have predicted the horror about to tear through their day. 17-year-old Thomas T.J. Lane walked into that cafeteria wearing a sweatshirt with the word "killer" scrawled across it. In his hand, a .22 2-caliber handgun. Witnesses say he appeared composed and focused. Then, without any warning, he pulled the trigger. He fired at a table of students, inflicting catastrophic damage. By the time the chaos subsided, Lane had fatally shot 3 teenagers: Daniel Parmertor, Demetrius Hewlin, and Russell King Jr. Each was only 16 or 17 years old, kids with entire futures ahead of them. 3 other students were injured, and 1 would suffer permanent paralysis. Teachers and staff scrambled in terror, some shoving students into locked rooms, others diving across cafeteria tables to pull survivors to safety. One brave teacher chased Lane out of the building, urging him to drop his weapon. Lane fled and was apprehended within a few hours near his parked car, about a mile from the high school. The entire community reeled in disbelief. Nobody wanted to accept that one of their own teenagers was capable of executing such a deliberate, brutal act. Investigations revealed Lane had stolen the gun from his uncle, but the motive remained murky. Rumors suggested he felt bullied, ostracized, or was suffering mental anguish. However, Lane never showed any public remorse. In court, he solidified his reputation for cruelty. He wore the same killer inscription, smirked at the families who had lost children, and made obscene gestures during the proceedings. This was a boy still legally a minor, but with an air of icy indifference more commonly associated with hardened adult criminals. When he received 3 consecutive life sentences without parole in March 2013, many felt justice had been served. But the story wasn't over. In a twist that still haunts Ohio residents, Lane engineered a daring prison break on September 11, 2014, alongside 2 other inmates. For several hours, the man created a fresh wave of panic. Schools went on lockdown. News channels flashed his photo with urgent headlines. Was he armed again? Would he kill again? He was caught 6 hours later. But the lingering question remains, how does a teenager become so disconnected from empathy that he can joke, smile, and display the word killer in front of victims' grieving loved ones? Those who knew him recall a quiet boy, sometimes teased, who might have bottled up years of rage. Still, does bullying justify this carnage? Or was there always a monstrous side waiting for a trigger? The Bever Brothers. If you mention Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, to locals, many will think of the city's historical charm. But mention July 22, 2015, and they will remember the blood-soaked headlines that turned Broken Arrow into a name synonymous with heartbreak. 18-year-old Robert Bever and his 16-year-old brother Michael unleashed a rampage so brutal it seemed ripped from a horror film. Their twisted goal? Achieving internet fame and widespread media coverage. They dreamed of killing at least 50 people, then basking in the infamy. Their quiet suburban household became ground zero for one of Oklahoma's grimmest massacres. Late that night, the boys had their knives ready, knives they'd been collecting, concealing, and obsessing over for weeks. Robert allegedly convinced Michael to lure one sister into a bedroom under a harmless pretext, like checking something out on a computer. The moment she stepped inside, Robert attacked, slashing her throat and stabbing her repeatedly. Hearing the screams, their mother, April Bever, rushed to help. She was met with at least 48 knife wounds. Their father, David, also fell under their blades. They stabbed him 28 times. The younger siblings tried to hide, but the brothers hunted them room by room. 12-year-old Daniel Bever managed to lock himself in a bathroom and dial 911, his voice shaking, describing the horror around him. But Michael tricked him into opening the door, calling out that he was also hurt. Once Daniel opened it, the brutal assault continued. By the time the police arrived, Daniel and 4 other family members had been murdered. A 2-year-old sister remained alive, too young even to grasp the extent of the bloodshed around her. The surviving 13-year-old sister, Crystal, was critically wounded, but managed to identify her older brothers as the killers. Robert and Michael fled out the back door, but the hunt didn't last long. Authorities, aided by a police K-9, found them hiding in nearby woods, drenched in sweat, adrenaline pumping. Detectives discovered the twisted rationale. The brothers wanted a Wikipedia page. They wanted social media to buzz with their names. Some might blame violent online subcultures for fueling their fantasies. Others see it as purely monstrous and inexplicable, a craving for murder. In separate trials, they both received multiple life sentences. Robert, the older brother, was handed life without parole. Michael, due to his age, got life with a remote possibility of parole, though it's unlikely he'll ever walk free. The bizarre, haunting question, how did 2 teenagers from the same household develop an identical craving for mass murder, especially against their own flesh and blood? Where does such evil begin? Sierra Halseth and Aaron Guerrero. Stories of teenage rebellions are common, but this particular twist in Las Vegas turned lethal. 16-year-old Sierra Halseth and her 18-year-old boyfriend, Aaron Guerrero, were locked in a Romeo and Juliet-style relationship that both families desperately tried to curtail. Sierra's father, Daniel Halseth, a figure embroiled in a custody fight with his ex-wife, had discovered that Sierra and Aaron planned to run away to Los Angeles. Fearing for his daughter, he forbade the relationship. That prohibition only fueled their desire to stay together, at any cost. On April 8, 2021, the teenage lovers made a series of ominous purchases: bleach, circular saw blades, lighter fluid, gloves, and a drop cloth. Anyone paying attention might have been alarmed, but it wasn't until April 9th that the tragic puzzle pieces fell into place. Daniel Halseth's mutilated remains were discovered in his garage. The autopsy reported more than 70 stab wounds across his head, neck, and torso. To cover their tracks, Sierra and Aaron placed his body in a sleeping bag and set it on fire, leaving behind a scene of nearly unimaginable violence. You might think that's where the horror ends, but the couple took it a step further. They recorded a YouTube video gleefully announcing, "Welcome back to our channel. Day 3 after murdering somebody." They giggled, teased each other, and acted as though they had accomplished something adventurous. The clip went public, sending shockwaves far beyond their Las Vegas neighborhood. Their flight from justice was brief. They headed to Salt Lake City, but authorities quickly tracked them down. In May 2022, both pleaded guilty to 9 counts, including murder and arson. Each received 22 years to life. At sentencing, Aaron offered some words of regret. Sierra, however, remained silent, never apologizing for the father she butchered. The question that lingers: how does teenage love descend into such madness? Did they truly believe they could burn all evidence, post on social media for shock value, and vanish without consequence? Their example is a grim testament to how passion, rebellion, and a lust for notoriety can coalesce into an act so vile. Even seasoned detectives are left reeling. Roxana Sikorsky, in Plymouth, Michigan, nestled among quiet suburban roads, an altogether different kind of teenage murder plot unfolded. Less about rage or infamy, more about psychological control and manipulation. Roxana Sikorsky, adopted from Poland at age 4, had struggled with reactive attachment disorder, often unable to bond healthily with her adoptive parents. By 15, she had begun an unsettling relationship with Michael Rivera, who was already in his early 20s. Roxana's parents, suspecting Rivera's intentions, disapproved of the relationship entirely. That disapproval may have been the catalyst. In October 2014, Rivera allegedly instructed Roxana in detail on how to eliminate her entire family, whom he saw as obstacles to their love. Some accounts describe how he sent Roxana diagrams highlighting vital arteries, telling her exactly where to cut. One night, Roxana crept into her younger brother's room with a fillet knife, apparently aiming for his neck. Miraculously, he survived. Her sister's screams woke their parents. Roxana panicked, fled the house through a window, and found Rivera. The pair hid out in southwest Detroit, but were soon apprehended. The scenario was terrifying. A young girl, psychologically compromised, following orders from an older man who coaxed her into the darkest of deeds. Charged as an adult, Roxana eventually pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and was sentenced to 10 to 20 years in prison. Rivera received life behind bars. The Sikorsky family was devastated, insisting that Roxana never truly wanted to harm them. They blamed Rivera for twisting Roxana's troubled mind. Even so, prosecutors maintained that the planning and severity of the crime warranted adult-level consequences. How do we measure accountability in a case like this? Where does the manipulator end and the manipulated begin? It's a puzzle with no easy solution, leaving the entire Plymouth community shaken. Joshua Phillips. Our final story takes us to Jacksonville's South Side, November 3, 1998. 8-year-old Maddie Clifton vanished while playing outside her home. Her disappearance sparked one of the largest manhunts in Jacksonville's history. Hundreds of volunteers joined law enforcement in combing the streets. Residents checked sheds, garages, and backyards. Flyers with Maddie's picture hung on light poles and convenience store windows. Joshua Phillips, a 14-year-old neighbor, even helped pass out leaflets, pretending he knew nothing. Days ticked by with no sign of Maddie. Then on November 10th, Joshua's mother noticed an odd smell and a wet patch near her son's waterbed. Worried there might be a leak, she looked underneath and discovered Maddie's lifeless body. In sheer horror, she ran outside and called the police. Joshua was arrested at school shortly after. When questioned, the teenager told a horrifying story. He said Maddie had come over to hit baseballs in the yard. He accidentally struck her in the eye with a ball. Worried that his short-fused father would be furious about having a friend over without permission, he panicked, dragged the injured girl inside, and tried to keep her quiet. But Maddie's cries wouldn't stop. He then bludgeoned her with a baseball bat, hid her under his bed, and continued about his day as if nothing had happened, only to realize later that Maddie was still breathing. In a final, unspeakable act, he stabbed her multiple times to ensure she was dead. The shockwave was immeasurable. How could a 14-year-old keep a decomposing body under his bed for a week? The psychological dread is almost inconceivable. Phillips was charged as an adult, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to life without parole. The only leniency was that he wasn't eligible for the death penalty due to his age. Later appeals cited his youth and possible fear of his father's abusive tendencies. Yet the brutality of hiding the body, the repeated assaults on Maddie, and the callous attempts to mask her presence, those facts overshadow any sympathy in many people's minds. Joshua Phillips remains in prison to this day, well into adulthood. Occasionally, his case resurfaces in discussions about juvenile sentencing. He has expressed regret, and some claim he was a frightened teen in an abusive household who made horrific choices in a moment of panic. Others see a manipulative young killer who inflicted hell on an innocent 8-year-old child, ignoring all sense of humanity. Each of these cases prompts a wave of questions that never really find neat answers. When a child kills, should the justice system draw a clear line? Should these killer kids face adult punishments because of the devastation they've caused? Or does their youth demand a chance at rehabilitation? Are they too dangerous to ever risk allowing back into society? We're left to grapple with deeply unsettling realities. Motives often remain unclear or unbelievably trivial. Bullying, fractured family relationships, online influences, or even momentary lapses in judgment have been cited. But brutality does not necessarily lessen with age. In some of these stories, the violence is every bit as cold and calculated as any adult homicide case. Mental health and environmental factors often loom large. Neglect, abuse, or unaddressed psychological issues might tilt the scales toward violence. But does that lessen responsibility? Societal responsibility versus personal accountability? How do we, as a society, balance protecting the public from these killers with the principle that children's brains aren't fully mature? The question of parole is thorny. Some states have revisited mandatory life without parole for juveniles, citing scientific studies about brain development. In many of these cases, parole opportunities are rare and heavily debated, requiring repeated demonstrations of remorse, psychological improvement, and a stable plan for re-entry, assuming any parole board dares to release someone convicted of such high-profile murders. You've just heard some of the most disturbing examples of kids who committed monstrous acts, landing themselves on the most feared list in the U.S. prison system. Their stories are cautionary tales about youth, rage, and the terrifying capacity for violence that can lurk in even the youngest among us. But now it's your turn to weigh in. Should these teenagers, some who were barely old enough to drive, be locked away for life, or do they deserve a second chance once they're older and potentially rehabilitated? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another deep dive into the darkest corners of human behavior.